"I'm going to need those keys now, Mr. Callan," Patricia said, lips thin, voice sweet like poison in tea. Her son stood behind her, arms crossed like this was some kind of intervention. The rest of her family spread out across my gravel path, filming, whispering, waiting to see if I'd cave. I didn't move. I looked her straight in the eye. "You really want to make HOA Karen brought her entire family to take my cabin keys go viral today?" She blinked. That wasn't the submission she came for. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Nate Callan, and this isn't just a second home. This is where my father died trying to save Ridge Pine Hollow from the worst fire in its history. He was the subdivision's original fire marshal, the one who built this cabin with his own hands, ventilation system first. Because he said roofs can be rebuilt, but lungs can't. I didn't inherit this land. I inherited the promise that came with it. Patricia didn't know that. She thought she was just enforcing some little-known rule about non-residency reassignment, a bylaw she waved around like scripture while declaring my property a potential hazard due to unverified usage. But what she was really doing was trying to erase a legacy. She never asked what my job was before I came back here. Never wondered how I knew the fire break zones better than the men she hired to mark them. She saw a part-time occupant. She didn't see the man who used to train field agents on wildfire structure defense. Where are you watching from? The key wasn't just for a door. It was for the only place that still carried my father's voice in the beams, his breath in the air ducts. The porch swing still creaked in time with the rhythm of his late-night coffee sips. There's a ridge behind the cabin where he used to test controlled burns. I go there every July 15th, same date every year, just to feel like he's still pacing it with me. So, when Patricia pulled up today with 3 SUVs, a binder, and a man recording on his phone, I knew she wasn't here for safety. She was here to make a statement. That's the thing about people like her. They love power, but they hate paperwork. They're fluent in intimidation, but illiterate in regulation. She quoted a clause about fire authority override for absentee lots and said the HOA had voted to temporarily reassign my keys. I let her talk. I always let them talk first. Doug, her husband, hovered at the end of the path. He didn't say much, just kept glancing at the fire seal stamped above my doorway, the one he knew better than to touch. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. I held the keys up, not offering them, just letting them catch the light. "Tell." "You what?" I said. "Bring me the certificate of inspection signed by a state-licensed fire mitigation officer, one who's current, and I'll hand these over." Patricia faltered for a second, just enough to see the twitch in her jaw. Because I am one of those officers, still licensed, still on file, still qualified. I designed the emergency access protocol she's trying to cite, and I knew she hadn't filed a single fire compliance update in 2 years. Her family looked on like spectators at a poker table, hoping she had the cards she claimed. She didn't. She stepped back, but not far enough. "Consider this your official warning, Mr. Callan," she snapped. I smiled, just barely. "You just issued it in front of 6 witnesses and 1 live stream. I'll be documenting your follow-up. Because this isn't just my cabin. It's the last thing that still breathes with my father's lungs. And if they want a war over it, they better bring more than a clipboard." She left without the keys, but not without leaving her mark. That HOA warning letter was tucked under my windshield by the time I came out with my coffee the next morning. It was damp from the mountain mist, the ink smudged like even the paper didn't want to be part of it. But the wording was still legible. Failure to comply will result in board escalation and potential revocation of property access privileges under Section 14.3, Emergency Use Protocols. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to see if there was any part of it I'd missed. There wasn't. Patricia wasn't bluffing. She was building a paper trail. I kept the letter, slid it into a folder with a few other notices from previous years, each one louder than the last. Every summer I returned, there was a new rule, a new reason why my presence, my repairs, or even the swing set on the porch didn't conform to Ridge Pine Hollow's aesthetic standards. But this was different. This wasn't about paint color or outdated shingles. This was about control. So, I walked the perimeter, not to look for fires, but to feel the land. The trail behind the cabin was still soft with pine mulch, the air laced with the familiar scent of sap and charred wood from old burns. I used to patrol landscapes like this professionally, checking the dryness of underbrush, evaluating clearances between brush lines and wood structures. My hands moved automatically, part memory, part muscle. The fire break I carved years ago still held strong. No overgrowth, no hazards. But I noticed something else. Across the ridge, 3 other properties were flagged with neon orange markers, temporary tags the HOA used to indicate lots under review. One of them belonged to Mrs. Haverly, an 82-year-old widow who lived full-time at the edge of the loop. I crossed the trail and followed the split toward her gate. She was out front, watering a patch of stubborn wildflowers in a clay pot, her back hunched, sun hat drooping over one eye. "You get one of these too?" I held up the letter. She didn't need to look. 3 weeks ago, she said, setting the watering can down. Said my chimney venting was non-compliant, but I haven't had a fire in 15 years. That sounded about right. "Did they inspect it?" I asked. She snorted. "They never even came up the steps." That sounded even more right. I leaned on the railing beside her. From here, I could see the line of cabins that Patricia had targeted, every one of them with owners who'd either pushed back on fines or refused to donate to one of her volunteer landscaping funds. "Did they tell you what happens if you don't fix it?" "They said someone might need to step in," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I asked who. They didn't say. I nodded, more for myself than her. This wasn't about non-compliance. This was a pattern, a purge. Seasonal owners and older residents made up nearly a third of the neighborhood, but we didn't vote in board elections, didn't show up to meetings, didn't attend HOA barbecues. In Patricia's world, that made us disposable. In the name of emergency readiness, she was quietly building a case to take hold of properties and reassign access, especially those that had any fire adjacency. But here's what she didn't count on. I still kept my fire investigator's license active, quietly, privately. Because the only thing worse than a wildfire is watching amateurs think they know how to prevent one. I walked back to my cabin with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. She wanted to talk about emergency readiness? Fine. Let's talk code compliance. Let's talk evacuation logistics. Let's talk about how half of her flagged properties were safer than the HOA community center itself. I opened my laptop and pulled up the public meeting minutes from the last 2 years. Patricia had chaired 12 consecutive sessions, and in 6 of them, she'd mentioned emergency usage evaluations. Not once had she mentioned bringing in a certified inspector, because she hadn't. I clicked through until I found a name I hadn't seen in years. Doug Kenley, her husband, a contractor by trade, formerly licensed in residential development. He hadn't spoken in a board meeting for over a year, but he was there. Doug was already parked outside the hardware store when I pulled in. Not in the front lot where Patricia usually parked, bold and angled across 2 spaces, but near the back, next to a rusted delivery truck nobody had moved in years. His truck was clean, empty in the bed, save for a folded ladder and a single bag of lime. I stepped out slow. Didn't say anything, just gave a small nod as I passed his open window. He tapped the steering wheel once, like it meant something. Then he got out. We didn't talk right away, just walked the same aisle of weatherproofing sealants, neither of us reaching for anything. It was the kind of silence men carry when they know they're about to do something that'll cost them peace at home. Finally, Doug spoke. "You didn't deserve that yesterday." "Which part?" I asked. "The attempted key grab or the whole audience she brought for it?" He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "She told me it'd be a formality, said you'd hand them over and avoid a penalty. I didn't think she'd actually escalate it like that." I turned to face him fully. "You didn't stop her either." Doug looked down at his hands, big scarred knuckles, the kind that remembered hammers and joints and corners that never quite aligned. "You think I get a vote in any of this?" he muttered. "I stopped voting the moment she took over the board." "You're still on the HOA rolls," I said. "Still show up. Still stand behind her when she pushes people like Mrs. Haverly out of their own homes." That made him flinch. Look, I'm not proud of it, he said, but she's got the board wrapped up. 4 of the 7 depend on her for something. Contract renewals, referrals, you name it. She's made herself untouchable. Not to me. Doug glanced around the aisle, then leaned in slightly. You're the first one who's ever told her no in public. And you knew what she was quoting when she said Section 14.3. That caught her off guard. I said nothing. Just watched the weight settle in his posture. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. You didn't get this from me. I unfolded it. It was a draft resolution, one I hadn't seen in the HOA archive yet. It outlined a new amendment, emergency access key custody for underutilized lots. It was dated for board review 2 weeks from now, but Patricia had already begun enforcing it. She's preemptively testing it, I said, before it's even ratified. Doug nodded slowly. She's banking on no one fighting it until it's too late. I folded the paper and slid it into my back pocket. You've known about this for how long? 6 months, he admitted, shame crawling up his neck. I didn't think she'd target your place. I figured you were too visible, too tied in. You figured wrong. He looked away. I know. We stood there for a while longer, both pretending to scan the price tags on silicone caulking, like we weren't trading the first crack in Patricia's wall of silence. I'm not asking you to blow up your marriage, I finally said. But if this goes further, if she makes another move, I'll need more than this. He hesitated, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. I'll let you know before the next meeting. That's all I can promise right now. Fine, I said. That's more than I had yesterday. He turned and walked out without another word. The automatic doors whooshed closed behind him, leaving me alone in an aisle of synthetic. Barriers, some meant to keep weather out, others meant to seal people in. I stood there a minute longer before heading to the back counter, bought 2 rolls of fireproof flashing tape and a new carbon filter. If Patricia wanted a safety audit, I'd give her one, just not the kind she was prepared for, because now I had something she didn't. A crack in her foundation. The next notice came faster than I expected, less than 48 hours after my talk with Doug. This time, it wasn't printed on standard HOA stationery. It was laminated, tacked to my porch post like a public warning. A neon orange tag labeled Temporary Fire Evacuation Reassignment Pending Inspection, with Patricia's initials scrawled at the bottom like a badge of honor. No hearing, no inspection. Just a label meant to humiliate. I ripped it down slowly, folding it in half before tucking it into the same folder that now held the warning letter and Doug's leaked draft. The folder was getting thicker by the day. The real insult wasn't the notice. It was what came with it, an emergency committee directive taped to 3 other cabins on my loop. Mrs. Haverly's was among them. So was the Durans, a retired couple who spent their summers restoring their deck and minding their own business. It was a purge, and now it was accelerating. I took the long way around the loop trail, wanting to see if this was isolated or something wider. Along the bend where the road curled east, I spotted 2 more cabins with the same laminated tag. That made 6, all on the fringe of the neighborhood, all on the older lots built before Patricia ever moved in. And every one of them, without exception, had retrofitted ventilation systems I recognized, either installed by my father or improved by someone he trained. She wasn't just coming for absentee owners. She was targeting legacy builds. I followed the trail all the way back to my own lot, eyes scanning the ridgeline. From this elevation, I could see the newer homes, sleek, HOA-approved models with artificial turf and decorative stone siding, most of them built under Patricia's board tenure. They didn't have laminated notices. They never did. I opened my phone and loaded the county assessor's site, pulled up parcel maps, zoning tags, construction permit IDs. My fingers moved fast, muscle memory from years of field checks. And there it was. Of the 6 lots tagged this week, 5 had not updated their fire mitigation certificates within the last 5 years. That would be a problem, if not for one detail. The county hadn't required updates on those structures due to their status as grandfathered under earlier codes. Codes that my father had helped write. Codes I had enforced. Patricia either didn't know that or hoped no one else did. I scrolled through public records until I found it. Resolution number -14-FM. The clause was still active. It stated that any property outfitted with sealed fire return systems and compliant with the 2005 Ridgepine Manual would be exempt from mandatory renewal inspections unless structural changes occurred, which meant every notice she issued this week was unenforceable. The next step was obvious. I needed verification. I headed down to the city municipal building the next morning, checking in under my old license number. The clerk, a wiry guy named Reggie I hadn't seen in years, did a double take when he saw my badge still valid. "Didn't expect to see your name still active." "Neither did Ridgepine Hollow," I said. He raised a brow but said nothing as he printed the compliance archive I requested. Took him 10 minutes. When he handed me the documents, his fingers paused on the last page. "You doing an audit?" he asked, voice casual. "Just checking if a few things slipped through the cracks." His smile was thin but knowing. Things always do. Outside, I sat in my truck and opened the folder. Line by line, I traced Patricia's timeline, her board proposals, the permits she pushed, the so-called safety initiatives. None of them were tied to licensed inspections, not one. She'd built an entire enforcement system on aesthetics and fear, while bypassing the one thing she claimed to uphold, actual safety. And now I had the receipts. The laminated tag was still in my passenger seat. I glanced at it, then at the paperwork in my lap. If Patricia wanted to play the authority card, she was going to have to sit across from someone who actually had it. I didn't sleep much that night, the kind of restlessness that comes from knowing the match is in your hand. But you're still waiting for the wind to shift. The fireproof documents from the municipal building were stacked neatly on my table, cross-referenced and highlighted. They weren't just records. They were proof of negligence, of bluffing with people's homes. But I needed more than paper. I needed a field check. By sunrise, I was walking the loop again, clipboard in hand, phone ready to photograph every violation she thought no one would see. I wasn't inspecting the old builds this time. I was headed straight for the new ones, the Patricia homes, as half the neighborhood called them. Cookie-cutter cabins with designer siding and exposed wooden beams. Pretty, efficient, and, to someone who knew what to look for, dangerously undercode. I started with the largest one on Hollow Creek Drive, 3 years old, expansive deck, glass railing, a dry brush barrier no more than 15 feet from the rear wall. I measured the clearance, 15 feet, 2 inches. State code required 30. Ridgepine Hollow added 5 feet on top of that. Strike one. I crouched near the exterior vent system. The slats weren't sealed. A gust of ember-heavy wind during a fire could funnel flame straight into the air return. No spark guards, no backflow damper, no internal suppression foam. Strike two. Inside the community drop box near the rec center, I flipped through the public-facing safety files. The most recent inspection logs weren't signed by licensed personnel. They were signed by HOA committee members, 2 of whom also sat on Patricia's landscaping business payroll. Strike 3, I took photos, vents brush line, signature mismatches. I compiled a side-by-side comparison with the sealed systems on my own cabin, systems installed under pre-2005 compliance rules, ones the county had specifically marked as exempt from mandatory update cycles. That was the irony of it all. Patricia had declared older homes unsafe, while greenlighting newer builds that failed the very protocols she claimed to enforce. And in her haste to control key distribution, she'd left a trail wide enough to drive a brush rig through. As I rounded the bend back toward my cabin, I passed a crew hired by the HOA trimming branches near one of the eastern lots. One of them waved, then frowned as he saw my camera. "You city?" he asked. "Nope," I said. "Private compliance check." He looked at my badge, then at the clipboard. "Didn't know they were bringing in outside help." They didn't. The guy blinked, confused, but shrugged and went back to work. Back at the cabin, I printed everything. I wasn't going to give Patricia the chance to bury digital files under bureaucracy. Hard copies only, every image labeled, every timestamp noted, every bylaw violation highlighted in red ink. I spread them across the same table where my father once taught me to sharpen axe blades, the same table he leaned over while teaching me to map wind patterns on topo maps. Each document was a nail in her narrative, but one detail stopped me cold. The inspection log for Hollow Creek Lot 7, one of Patricia's pride and joy builds, listed a fire suppression certification signed by a contractor I knew was deceased. Signed just 6 months ago. Either she'd reused a template and never changed the signature, or she'd forged it. Either way, it was fraud. I circled it in black marker, drew a line beneath it, and added it to the top of the packet. I'd spent a career learning to read landscapes, not just the land, but the people who try to reshape it without understanding the cost. Patricia wasn't building a safer neighborhood. She was consolidating power through fear, lies, and laminated warnings. Now, I had a loaded file of code violations, falsified documentation, and public safety hazards, and I was done waiting. The next time she stepped on my porch, I wouldn't be holding keys. I'd be holding this. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, the wind had shifted east, dry, unsettled. The kind that made the pines whisper like they remembered every ember that ever kissed their bark. I stepped outside and felt it in my bones. Wildfire weather, not the flame, the prelude. I knew this rhythm. I'd walked into too many post-burn zones not to recognize the signs. Ridgepine Hollow wasn't ready. Not in the way that mattered, and Patricia had made sure of it. The laminated warning tag still sat folded on my porch table. I unfolded it again, this time reading it not as a threat, but as an opening move. She was testing how far she could push before someone called her bluff. And if no one stood up, she'd escalate again. She always did. I needed to be ahead of her, not just in evidence, but in timing. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Joe Ramirez," a familiar voice answered, clipped and alert. Still the same after all these years. "It's Nate Callan," I said. "You still handle fire code review for Hillsborough and outlying areas?" She was silent for a second. "Didn't expect your voice again. Thought you vanished after Santeria." "I tried to, but something's about to go wrong up here." I explained everything, brief, factual, cold. The bogus reassignment notices, the non-compliant builds, the signatures that didn't match. The real risk underneath Patricia's power plays. Joe didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "You want this filed as formal inspection or whistleblower alert?" "Both," I said. "But I'm not hiding. Not this time." "Good. That'll make the testimony cleaner. I'll log the complaint tonight and flag the district supervisor for audit prep. I'll send you the compiled docs within the hour. Send them to my direct line. Skip the office inbox." I hung up and sat for a long minute, watching the treetops sway against a sky going gold to ash. The wind was still rising. So was my pulse. Inside, I ran through the printouts one final time, scanned them into a secure drive, and attached everything Joe would need. Timestamps, parcel records, photo metadata, and most importantly, the page with the forged contractor signature. That one would bury Patricia. I attached a personal statement at the end. Kept it to 3 sentences. I, Nathan Callan, hold active license number 1427FMI under state fire mitigation credentials. I have identified structural code violations and misrepresented compliance within Ridgepine Hollow. The individual acting as HOA president is enforcing penalties under an unratified amendment and misusing authority tied to public safety. No fluff, no drama, just facts. I sent the file. Outside, the trees hissed again. I walked the perimeter, flashlight in hand. Not because I expected anything to burn tonight, but because habit dies harder than fear. The fire break still held. The brush was low. No structural weakness on the vents, no dry moss near the flue. Every inch was how my father would have left it. But I noticed something new, a car idling at the far end of the road, lights off. One of Patricia's family SUVs. I couldn't see who was inside, but I didn't have to. She was watching. Or someone was watching for her. The intimidation wasn't over. It was shifting tactics. I raised my phone and snapped a photo. No flash, just enough light from the moon to catch the plates. If she wanted escalation, she'd get it. But this time, not on her terms. By morning, I'd follow up with Joe, file a secondary report to the city building inspector, and prepare everything for public submission at the next HOA board meeting. Patricia couldn't hide this behind whispers anymore. This was moving into public record, and if she tried to block it, then I'd make sure every homeowner in this forest knew she'd endangered their property, while silencing the one man who actually knew how to keep it safe. Let her laminate that. Doug was waiting by the old footbridge near the Eastern Trail when I found him, hands in his jacket pockets, head down, like he was pretending not to be there. But the way he shifted when he saw me told the truth. He'd been waiting a while. "You saw the SUV last night?" I asked. He nodded. "Her nephew, the one who filmed the key stunt, said he was just checking brush density, with the engine running at midnight." I didn't laugh. Neither did he. "She's losing control," he said finally. "That's when she gets dangerous." I stepped up beside him, watching the creek snake below us. "I sent it all in. Fire inspectors already flagged the board. She's under review." His jaw tensed. "She'll try to kill the audit, delay it, claim non-jurisdiction. She won't get the chance." Doug looked at me then. Really looked. The same eyes that had followed Patricia around every HOA meeting like they couldn't afford to blink. But now they were searching mine for something else. "You really filing this publicly?" "I already did." Silence settled between us like ash. He pulled something from his inside coat pocket, a folder, thin and creased. "I've been holding this," he said, almost like a confession. "Didn't know when or if it was worth bringing forward." He handed it over. Inside were 3 emails, dated 6 months apart, all from Patricia to the HOA board members. No official headers, just subject lines like urgent compliance alignment and private fire risk memo, do not circulate. But the language was clear. She was ordering board members to pre-tag high-risk properties for potential transition before any formal vote. One message even listed names, mine included. "She started drafting these notices before any legal process," I said, flipping through the pages. Doug nodded. "She planned the whole thing months before she introduced it to the board. Called it proactive fire governance. Said if anyone pushed back, she'd use community safety as cover. Said no one would question her if it looked like a liability call." My stomach turned. "And the signatures?" "She forged at least 2. One contractor's dead. Another moved out of state 3 years ago. I asked her once, offhand, why his name was still on the forms. She said, 'Nobody checks the ink if the paper looks official.'" I shook my head slowly. "She's playing bureaucracy like a shell game." Doug looked down at his boots. "She always has." He didn't say more, but his shoulders sank in a way I hadn't seen before. Not defeated, relieved, like something too heavy had finally been handed off. "You okay if I attach these to the public board complaint?" I asked. He hesitated only a second. "Yeah, just don't use my name yet. Let me tell the others myself." "Fair." I tucked the folder into my pack. The wind rattled through the bridge slats, dry and sharp, the smell of pine dust thick in the air. We both turned at the same time, an instinct shared by men who've spent too many years expecting something behind them. Nothing there, just forest. Still, Doug's voice dropped. "She won't go down easy. You know that, right?" "She doesn't have to go down easy," I said. "She just has to go down in public." He gave a slow, bitter smile. "That'll hurt more." We walked back toward the loop in silence. Doug peeled off at the corner near his truck, gave me a nod. I didn't return right away. Not out of coldness, just calculation. He was still inside the walls of her kingdom. I needed him to stay there, just a little longer. I reached my cabin just before the ridge turned purple with sunset. Sat down at my table, opened my laptop, and added Doug's folder to the audit file. I updated the submission form, time-stamped the attachments, and CC'd the fire inspector, the city's code enforcement division, and the Ridgepine Hollow Public Records email. Then I stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. The whistleblower had spoken. The witness had stepped forward. Now it was time to let the fire spread. The next 72 hours were quiet. Unnaturally so. No SUV parked at the edge of my lot. No laminated notices. Not even one of Patricia's little drop-by inspections. The quiet wasn't peace. It was a shift in strategy. And it only meant one thing. She knew. I spent that time doing what she thought no one would. I walked every flagged lot in the subdivision, 6 in total, brought my gear, measured vent clearances, brush distance, siding type, and air return integrity. Every cabin passed with room to spare. I documented each one with photos, angles, timestamps, and ID markers. Sent the full set to Joe Ramirez with the subject line, Control Group Assessment, confirming non-compliance fabrication. Her reply came back 3 hours later. Received, consistent pattern of misrepresentation. Official site audit scheduled for 5:30 p.m., Tuesday. That gave me 1 day to make sure Patricia couldn't spin the narrative. I started with the bulletin board outside the Ridgepine Hollow Recreation Center, the same one she used to post holiday potluck notices and neighborhood warnings. I pinned one of my own, a simple flyer labeled Clarification on Fire Risk Notices, Public Safety Update. It listed the legal citation for the grandfathered exemption under Resolution Number 98-14-FM, highlighted in bold, followed by a disclaimer. If your home was built or certified under this resolution, you are not required to undergo reinspection or surrender access keys. For questions, contact City Fire Compliance Office directly at number. I watched 2 residents read it within the hour. One of them, Mr. Duran, folded it and tucked it under his arm without a word. The other gave me a thumbs up from across the lot. But I wasn't finished. At noon, I pulled up to the Ridgepine Community Center, a glass front structure she'd championed in every HOA newsletter. It had modern lines, solar panels, and a list of safety protocols posted in the entryway. I walked right up to the fire safety diagram. It was wrong. The evacuation route for the East Ridge Loop led directly through a narrow tree corridor that hadn't been cleared in over a year. Worse, it crossed under exposed power lines. I took photos, logged it, sent them to Joe with the caption, Official Evacuation Route in Violation of State Clearance Mandates. Then I drove back to my cabin and finished the final prep. The file was thick now, full of contradictions. Patricia's forged approvals, Doug's leaked emails, my field inspection reports, county records, photos, aerial overlays of brush line density versus construction dates, and now documentation of improper evacuation paths. She hadn't just lied, she'd endangered the neighborhood while claiming to protect it, and she'd left a trail of digital and physical fingerprints long enough for any regulator to follow. I made 2 hard copies, one for the city fire marshal's office and one for the HOA public record, bound, indexed, numbered, and I printed my final statement on the first page. This report has been submitted in accordance with state fire mitigation law and public safety obligations. All violations documented herein constitute material misrepresentation, negligence, or procedural fraud by the acting HOA president. Simple, factual, lethal. At dusk, I walked the ridge once more, the same trail my father used to patrol at the end of long days. The air was still dry, but something in it felt sharper now, like the wind was waiting to carry the truth. Down below, I saw Doug at the edge of his driveway. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away either. It was almost time. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 6 p.m., but the fire inspection team would arrive 30 minutes before that, quietly, professionally, and with full legal jurisdiction. I'd already arranged to meet Joe at the south gate with the original inspection packet and my ID. Patricia didn't know it yet, but the war she started with a clipboard was about to end with a certified violation report, signed, stamped, and submitted. And when the smoke cleared, it wouldn't be my key she was after. It would be her own. I arrived at the south gate 15 minutes early. Joe Ramirez was already there, boots planted, clipboard tucked under one arm, fire inspector badge clipped where it couldn't be ignored. She gave me a nod that said we were past introductions and small talk. This was about execution now. "Packet ready?" she asked. I handed over the thick folder. She flipped through the first dozen pages with practice speed, eyes scanning signatures, time-stamped photos, aerial overlays. She didn't speak until she reached the forged inspection sheet from Lot 7. "Still using a dead man's signature," she muttered. "Bold." "That's the word for it," I said. She slipped the folder into her inspection case and zipped it shut. "I've got 2 more from the city on standby," she said. One will sweep the evacuation corridors. I'll take the flagged properties and the recreation center. By the time the board meeting starts, we'll have enough to put this on the record, with or without cooperation. I gave her the gate code. They'll try to stall you at the guardhouse, say they need board clearance. I don't take instructions from ornamental security, Joe said. We split up. Joe took the utility trail toward the eastern lots. I made my way up the central loop toward the recreation center, where I'd set up the printed flyers just yesterday. A few had been ripped down, but most remained. One had been taped back up, slightly crooked, with a handwritten note scribbled underneath. Thank you. We didn't know. At 5:15 p.m., I stood across the street from the rec center parking lot and watched cars arrive, board members first. Patricia showed up 10 minutes later, stepping out of a silver SUV in a blazer too stiff for the mountain air. Her hair was pinned back, her phone already pressed to her ear. Doug trailed behind her, slower, eyes flicking toward me once before dropping back to the pavement. Inside the center, folding chairs had been arranged in rows. A microphone stood at the front, flanked by 2 poster boards with HOA diagrams, likely meant to steer the conversation before anyone could raise a hand. But they wouldn't get the chance. At 5:27, Joe entered. She wore her authority like armor. Her badge was visible. Her case was in her hand. Behind her, one of the city aides wheeled in a metal file box labeled Compliance Audit, Ridge Pine Hollow. Patricia looked up and froze mid-sentence. Good evening, Joe said, calm but cutting. This is an active compliance review. All unauthorized modifications to fire codes, public safety routes, or emergency reassignment procedures are now under formal evaluation. Patricia blinked. Her lips parted like she was about to object, but Joe kept talking. This audit was triggered by a whistleblower report containing documented discrepancies in fire mitigation enforcement, forgery of inspection credentials, and misuse of emergency protocols. We are reviewing 6 properties, 1 common area, and 2 proposed amendments for legal compliance. She placed the audit folder on the front table. The sound echoed louder than any voice in the room. Patricia stepped forward, recovering her posture. I was not made aware of any formal complaints, Joe interrupted. That's incorrect. Your office received an inquiry notice yesterday at 3:41 p.m. Failure to acknowledge it does not negate its delivery. People started shifting in their chairs. A few heads turned toward the back, where I stood against the wall, arms crossed. Doug didn't move. Joe gestured to the board members. We'll begin on-record interviews shortly. But before that, Mr. Callan, I stepped forward. Joe unzipped the audit case and pulled out the highlighted inspection forms, my annotated photos, the legal citations from state code. Can you confirm this documentation is your own work? I can. I'm a licensed fire mitigation inspector under active status. I personally verified the compliance of every flag structure and confirmed that the HOA's claims contradict standing state exemption law. Joe nodded. Thank you. Patricia's voice rose, brittle and defensive. This meeting is not authorized for legal testimony. Correct, Joe said. That's why the real one will happen tomorrow, in court. But this, she tapped the mic. This is for the people you've been misleading. Patricia turned to Doug. Say something. Doug looked at her, then looked at me, then lowered his head. I already did, he said. Patricia didn't sit, not even when the rest of the board took their seats like the air had gone heavy with consequence. She stood behind the table, one hand gripping the back of a folding chair, the other clutching a manila folder she hadn't opened yet. Her jaw was set, but her fingers trembled, just enough for someone trained in body language to catch it. Joe caught it. So did I. Before this meeting proceeds, Patricia said, trying to steady her voice, I'd like to invoke HOA Article 12, Emergency Deferment of Public Hearings under Administrative Dispute. Joe didn't even blink. Denied. Your bylaw deferral doesn't supersede state safety audits. You can read it in subsection 647B if you're unfamiliar. There was a pause. Patricia looked to the rest of the board. No one backed her. They just sat there, stiff and quiet, eyes flicking between Joe, me, and the growing stack of paperwork in the city aide's hands. That's when she played her last card. She reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet, printed in bold. "This is a petition," she said, "signed by 11 residents supporting emergency reassignment of properties deemed non-primary use. We're within rights to proceed." I walked toward the board table. "You got those signatures using threats of fines and safety violations that don't exist. You handed out warnings that violated state grandfather clauses. You used your husband's silence to push fake authority on people who trusted. You," Patricia snapped, "you're not on the board." "No," I said, "but I'm on the state registry, and I know what a fraudulent safety audit looks like." Joe took the paper from her, glanced at it. "These signatures have no bearing on safety regulation. Fire code isn't a popularity contest." That line drew a ripple of quiet laughter from the back rows, neighbors who had spent years too intimidated to speak. I spotted Mr. Duran among them, Mrs. Haverly too. Her eyes were wet but clear. Patricia's grip on the chair tightened. "This is a witch hunt," she hissed. Joe placed the petition face down. "Number: This is an accountability review, and based on what I've seen, this community's leadership is under review for code negligence, procedural fraud, and obstruction of public safety compliance." The silence that followed wasn't stunned, it was waiting for what she'd say next, waiting to see if she'd fight or fold. Patricia looked around, at the board, at her neighbors, at Doug. And Doug finally stood. "I vouched for her," he said quietly, "because I thought it was the only way to keep things stable. But I've watched good people leave, watched this board approve inspections we never verified. And when she brought her family to Nate's property like it was hers to take, that's when I knew." Patricia's mouth opened. "You said you'd back me?" "I said I'd keep my name off what I couldn't defend," he cut in. "I'm done defending this." He walked away from the table and sat beside me. Joe looked back to the board. "Given the testimony, forged documentation, and breach of compliance, I'm issuing a temporary hold on any enforcement actions authorized under the new amendment proposal, effective immediately." Patricia tried one last move, quietly gathering her things, preparing to leave, as if retreat meant she'd still control the narrative. But Joe spoke again. "One more thing, the forged contractor signature, that's being submitted for legal review under municipal fraud." Patricia stopped in the doorway. "You'll be notified," Joe said, her voice flat. Patricia turned slowly, eyes blazing with fury that no longer had an audience. No one stood to support her. No one offered her an exit line. Even the people who once nodded politely at HOA meetings now stared at her like they didn't recognize who she'd become. She stepped outside, the door swung shut behind her, and for the first time since I'd returned to Ridgepine Hollow, the room didn't feel watched. It felt ready. The board meeting ended without a vote. There was no need. Patricia was gone, and the weight of everything she'd built, layer by layer, rule by rule, had collapsed the moment silence took her place. The rest of the board sat in stunned stillness, unsure whether to apologize or wait for someone to tell them what to do next. Joe broke that silence. "We'll be issuing a public compliance statement within the next 72 hours, she said. "Until then, all enforcement activity under the unauthorized amendment is suspended. All homeowners previously flagged are advised to retain their property access as normal." She turned to me, then to Doug. "We'll need both of your testimonies documented, tonight, if possible." Doug gave a stiff nod. I did too. The crowd in the room had grown larger over the last hour. Not just homeowners, but caretakers, renters, even teenagers who'd only come because their parents dragged them. It didn't matter. They were all there to see what had happened. What could happen when someone stood up and didn't blink? Mrs. Haverly raised a hand from the second row. "Are we still allowed to ask questions?" Joe gestured toward the front. "If they're about safety or code, yes." The old woman stood slowly. She didn't need to speak loudly. Everyone had gone quiet for her. "I want to know if someone is going to inspect the board, not just the homes." Joe nodded. "There will be a follow-up audit into Ridgepine Hollow's HOA governance. City compliance will determine whether a temporary leadership transition is necessary." A man from the back added, "How did this happen without anyone noticing?" I stepped forward. "Because she made you feel like the rules were written in stone," I said. "But they weren't. They were printed on paper, and no one flipped the page." That got murmurs of agreement. Not loud, just real. Another woman, someone I didn't recognize, stood next. What if someone wants to challenge the board formally? Doug stood this time. We're opening that process, effective immediately. Anyone interested in interim board service can speak with me or the clerk at the back. There will be a new election in 90 days. 90 days. 3 months to rebuild what she'd hollowed out. The rest of the meeting unraveled slowly. A few more questions, some cautious applause. Several neighbors approached me quietly, thanking me, offering to help, asking if there would be a copy of the audit posted somewhere public. Joe promised there would be. I waited until the crowd thinned before gathering my things. The folder of evidence was already scanned, backed up, and submitted. My part was almost done. But before I left, I stood on the small stage in front of the microphone. No one prompted me. No one stopped me. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came here to remember someone. My hand brushed the folder beside me. My father died defending land like this. He helped write the fire codes that Patricia twisted. He believed in clearings, in airflow, in discipline that meant survival. I honored that by keeping my mouth shut and my inspections quiet. But silence doesn't preserve legacies. Action does. A hush fell over the room. No shifting chairs, no shuffling feet. I'm not staying, I said, but I'll be watching, and I'll come. Back if I need to. I stepped down, walked out the same doors Patricia had gone through just an hour earlier. Outside, the sky had turned slate blue, that mountain kind of dusk, where the trees look like shadows and the wind hums low against the eaves. Doug caught up with me at the sidewalk. He didn't speak at first. Then he said, "You didn't have to go that far. You know that, right?" I nodded. But it was the only way to stop her from going farther. He looked out over the cabins where porch lights were flickering on. Maybe next time we'll recognize the fire before it spreads. Maybe, I said. But we both knew there'd always be another Patricia somewhere, another paper rule, another laminated threat, and someone else would have to answer it. I stood on the porch one last time, hands resting on the rail my father built nearly 30 years ago, the same spot where Patricia had stood weeks ago, demanding my keys like she owned the right to this air, this soil, this view, the same spot where I'd first told her, calm and certain, that I wasn't giving in. Now, the laminated notice was gone. The tags had been removed from every flagged property. Joe's final report had been posted publicly, and Patricia's resignation was listed in the community bulletin under a heading that read, "Leadership Transition, effective immediately." I hadn't planned on staying this long. The original plan was 2 weeks, quiet maintenance, a hike through the ridge, maybe one night where I sat at the fire pit with a beer and said a few words to the memory of a man who'd never gotten a proper goodbye. But when the fight found me, I didn't back down. Not because I like conflict, because I remember how fast fire moves when no one calls it out. Doug stepped onto the gravel path leading up to my cabin, hands tucked into his jacket, head down, like always. He looked older in the golden light, or maybe just unburdened. "You heading out tomorrow?" he asked. I nodded. "Drive down at sunrise. Thought I'd beat the weekend traffic." He shifted his weight. "The vote passed this morning. Interim boards formed. Haverly's on it. So is Duran. We've got 60 days to run elections. You staying on?" He gave a thin smile. "Only long enough to clean up what she left behind. I owe them that." I stepped down from the porch and handed him the final copy of the audit summary. "Keep it safe, not for retaliation, just for memory." Doug looked at the folder like it weighed more than paper. "Funny how quiet it is now." "It's not quiet," I said. "It's settled." We stood there for a few seconds more, just listening. The wind had changed again, softer now, less dry. Somewhere nearby, a screen door creaked open and shut. Normal sounds, the kind that meant life had returned. He offered his hand. I took it. "Thanks, Nate, for not walking away." I let go first. "Thanks for eventually turning around." He chuckled at that and left without another word. I packed up that night, rolled the old fire maps, double-checked the vents, sealed the crawlspace hatch. Every action felt like punctuation, like closing something bigger than a cabin. Just before midnight, I sat in the porch swing and looked up at the ridge. The stars were clear, sky clean of smoke and tension. I could almost hear my father's boots crunching along the brush line. Ghost steps, but grounding all the same. This place didn't just survive, it healed. And the next person Patricia tries to steamroll, if she ever shows her face in another HOA, will have a paper trail and a precedent waiting for her. That's the difference now. Because when people like her get loud, someone needs to get louder with the truth. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.